Now let's take a look at the appendicular muscles, the muscles that are responsible for the position of the pectoral girdle, the ones that move the arm, forearm, wrists, hand and fingers, muscles of the pelvic girdle, and those muscles that move the thigh and leg and feet and toes. So quite a few muscles in this last section that we'll be lecturing on, the appendicular muscles. So we'll start with the muscles that position the pectoral girdle. In this figure, we'll start out with the trapezius muscle here. Trapezius muscle. It's not shown on this side because it is one of the more superficial muscles. It is diamond shaped, and depending on which region you're looking at, it has many different actions. So there is a nice table in your textbook that does describe the origins, insertions, and additional actions, which is a very complete list. The next muscle I want to point out here is the Levator Scapulae, and this adducts or elevates the scapula. Next, the rhomboid muscles here. The rhomboid muscles adduct and rotate the scapula laterally. Down here, one you need to know for lab is the serratus anterior, and this abducts and rotates the scapula. So again, this is a posterior view of the muscles of the pectoral girdle. This side is superficial and this side is deep. Before I go on, I do want to point out that you can see the serratus anterior here on the anterior view as well, and you can see them just a little bit here too. Well, this is a nice figure that shows the external intercostals here, and the internal intercostals moving at a oblique angle even to those external intercostals. And that was one of the ways that you can see the difference between them on the muscle man in lab, is that the external intercostals are moving as though they're from armpit to belly button, and the internal intercostals, they're grain, if you will, almost looks like they're moving from your iliac crest up towards your sternum. So just a completely different angle, making almost a V shape. Anyway, sorry for the repetition there, but the trapezius I pointed out here, you can see just a little bit of it up here from an anterior view as well, and that's probably one of the reasons that they have the number there for that trapezius on the muscle man right here in the anterior view. You can see the levator scapulae again, even from the anterior view, right next to it here and over here. The subclavius, what a great name, so descriptive, is this muscle right here that along with the pectoralis minor, which has been cut away here, but you can see right here, those two work together to depress and abduct the shoulder. So another similar looking figure, but different muscles picked out for you here. These are going to be muscles that move the arm. Muscles that move the arm. So we'll start with the deltoid, which you can see in an anterior view, and you can also see from the posterior view. This deltoid is this triangular shaped muscle at the very top or most superior, most proximal aspect of the arm. And the deltoid is responsible for abducting the arm. The pectoralis major, the big seashell type shaped muscle, only seen on the anterior view here. The pectoralis major flexes the arm at the shoulder. Okay. One of the muscles you do need to know for the lab practical is the subscapularis right here. Now, this view, remember that this is an anterior view. Okay, so what they have done is they've actually cut away the ribs here, and they've cut away the ribs here so that you're looking at the most anterior aspect of the scapula. So this is the part of the scapula that is right up against the ribs, against the back. Okay, so the subscapularis is sub or under the scapula, if you will, subscapularis. It is responsible for medial rotation at the shoulder. The Coracobrachialis is right here. You can see it just ever so slightly sticking out from underneath the Biceps Brachii, but the Coracobrachialis is a muscle that's responsible for adducting and flexing the shoulder. The Teres Major, let's go down to the posterior view to find him. Teres Major is this bottommost or most inferior, if you will, muscle attached to the scapula here, the Teres Major. It's a little bit fatter than the Teres Minor right next to it. So the Teres Major is going to be responsible for adducting the shoulder and for medial rotation at the shoulder. The Supraspinatus, which can be seen here and even over here as well. That's one that you do need to know for your lab practical. The Supraspinatus is going to assist the deltoid in abducting the arm. The latissimus dorsi here is this big sheet, this big triangular sheet of muscle, latissimus dorsi, and this is responsible for extending the arm at the shoulder. Before I move on, the infraspinatus here, you can see there's like 3 groups involved in this infraspinatus area right here on the posterior view. The infraspinatus works together with the teres minor to perform lateral rotation at the shoulder. And so the supraspinatus right here, the infraspinatus here, the teres minor here, and the subscapularis right here are going to be responsible, and the teres major are responsible for moving the arm, and they form the rotator cuff. All right, let's look at muscles that move the forearm and the wrist. The Triceps Brachii, seen here on the posterior view of the arm, the Triceps Brachii extends the elbow. The Brachioradialis here, the Brachioradialis here, and you can also see it here, Brachioradialis. This muscle flexes the elbow. The extensor Carpi radialis and the extensor Carpi ulnaris here. Those are responsible for extending the wrist. The extensor digitorum here, I bet you can probably figure out what that one is responsible for. That extends the digits, or it extends the fingers. The abductor pollicis here, abductor pollicis, yep, that's going to abduct the thumb. It's right next to the extensor pollicis, which is responsible for extending the thumb. Now we do have this extensor, it's like almost a bracelet shaped, extensor retinaculum that holds the tendons of those extensor muscles in place. Otherwise they would be popping up underneath the skin every time you wanted to extend your digits or your thumb. Oh, I almost mixed the flexor carpi ulnaris, which is responsible for flexing the wrist. Okay. So let's take a look at the anterior view next. The Coracobrachialis is one that I mentioned on the previous slide, but here it's labeled again. Remember that performs adduction and flexation at the shoulder. But the Biceps Brachii, right here, remember this is an anterior view now. The Biceps Brachii and the brachioradialis right next to it. You can just barely see it peeking out from underneath the biceps brachii. Are both responsible for flexation at the elbow. The Pronator Teres here, Pronator Teres, shows the back of the hand and arm. The Flexor Carpi Radialis. I always have them labeled in different places here. Oh, here we go. Flexor Carpi Radialis here, the Palmaris Longus right next to it, and the Flexor Carpi ulnaris again. Those again are going to flex the wrist. Another pronator is the Pronator Quadratus, and you can just so see it right here. So that's going to be responsible for pronating, or turning your thumb down, showing the back side of your hand. Oh, here we have our flexor retinaculum right here. Again, looking at the anterior view. So that's going to be holding the tendons of the flexor muscles in place, otherwise those would be popping out. I almost forgot the flexor digitorum superficialis, and those are going to be responsible for flexing the digits. So we're at a checkpoint here for this portion of this section, so focusing mainly on the muscles that move the shoulder and the arm. Which muscles do you use to shrug your shoulders? And do you know injury to the flexor carpi ulnaris would impair which two movements? So pause the recording here and see if you can hunt down the answers to those questions. The next section in your textbook looks at the muscles of the pelvic girdle in the lower limbs. So on the top left is a view of the gluteal region from the posterior aspect. Originating on the iliac crest, the Gluteus Medius, which you can just so see here, and it's cut here. But the Gluteus Medius and the Gluteus Maximus, you can see easily here. You can also see here, and it's been cut away here, so that you can see the Gluteus Minimus right here. Okay. Since it's so deep, you have to cut away the Gluteus Maximus and Medius. But the Gluteus Minimus is responsible for abduction of the leg and medial rotation of the hip. The Gluteus Maximus is the largest and the most posterior, and it's a hip extensor. The Gluteus Medius, like the Gluteus Minimus, abducts the leg and medially rotates the leg at the hip. The Tensor Fasciae Latae, right here, this small little muscle that you probably removed in lab when you were trying to view your vastus intermedius. This little muscle right here, Tensor Fasciae Latae, that can be seen on the top right. As I'm pointing here, it flexes, abducts, and medially rotates at the hip, as well as tense your iliotibial tract, or your IT band, which supports the knee. Your Vastus Lateralis, seen very well here, all the way back behind the IT band, or the iliotibial tract. Your Vastus Lateralis produces extension at the knee. It opposes the Biceps Femoris, which you can just see here in this lateral view. Okay. Biceps femoris, by the way, flexes the knee, as well as extension and lateral rotation at the hip. Similarly, the semi-membranous, which, oh, this is just a very, very sad picture. You can just barely see it here. But the semi-membranous, I can tell you that it flexes the knee and extends at the hip, but provides medial rotation at the hip. The longest tendon in the body is the plantaris, which helps to flex at the knee. And you can see it here wrapping around the back side of the knee. Back up here at the top, the Sartorius. Again, this is you can just see part of it here. A more anterior view would be ideal. And you'll see this one in lab as well. The Sartorius flexes at the knee, as well as flexation and lateral rotation at the hip. It's very, very long. The rectus femoris here, right in the very front, all the way down. The rectus femoris is going to oppose the extension of the knee, but synergistically provide flexation at the hip. Down here in the iliopsoas group, the psoas major, one of those that you need to know for your lab practical, but is just abbreviated as psoas, and the iliacus, right next to it, both provide flexation at the hip. Now in the adductor group here, the pectineus, the adductor brevis, the adductor longus, adductor magnus, and the gracialis all adduct at the hip. And of those, the ones you will need to know for lab include the adductor longus, and so this is a much better view of it than what you'll see in the muscle man. And the adductor magnus, which is more posterior to it, which is why you can only see this portion of it, but it does continue behind the adductor brevis and longus. So this is another view of the muscles of the leg. On the posterior left figure is where we're going to start. The most superior portion of the gluteus medius can be seen here, which again abducts the leg and medially rotates the leg. Most of it's covered by the gluteus maximus. It's a great view of it here. The main hip extensor. The adductor magnus, you can see peeking out right here from behind the gracialis, right here. And the semitendinosus and the semimembranous, which are much better seen on this figure. Here's semimembranous here, and the semitendinous here, which again both provide flexation at the knee. Next to those is a great view of the biceps femoris, which is right here and right here, this ribbon of muscle as well, which again also flexes the knee with help from the popliteus, which you can see wrapping around the posterior aspect of the knee here. On the anterior view, the iliopsoas group and the tensor fasciae latae are displayed again. So here you can see it, and the IT band, or the iliotibial tract, you can just see on the most lateral aspect there. The pectineus, adductor longus, and the gracilis are seen as well. You know, pectineus, adductor longus, and gracilis here, all adducting the leg. And this is a much better view of the Sartorius here. You can see it wrapping all the way around. And notice its S shape. That's one of the ways that that helps me remember that it's the Sartorius, so it has that S shape. And it flexes at the knee. Below that, you can see the quadricep muscles featured in this box. The rectus femoris right here in the front, the vastus lateralis to the lateral side, of the leg, and the vastus medialis more on the inside or the medial side of the leg. And that's not shown, but the vastus intermedius, remember that, is deep to the rectus femoris here. And onto the lower limb, the gastrocnemius. Now I like this picture because here on this side we start with a superficial dissection and we get more and more deep to show all of the different layers of the muscles here. But the gastrocnemius is this muscle right here, the one that you do need to know for lab. The gastrocnemius of the calf is assisted by the underlying soleus, which you can just see peeking out here and here, but here is a great view of that muscle. The gastrocnemius and the soleus do share this calcaneal tendon, which you might know better as the Achilles tendon. You can see a nice view of the popliteus here. Continuing on, you can see the plantaris just barely peeking out here, but here's a great view of it, and then just slightly deeper. So you can also visualize the tibialis posterior, fibularis longus. Oh, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Tibialis posterior here. Okay. The fibularis longus right here, and the fibularis brevis here, which produce eversion and plantar flexation, so they're ankle extensors. The flexor digitorum is seen here, but also this is probably the best view of that flexor digitorum. And medial to that muscle is the flexor hallucis longus, which you can see here. And notice that these tendons insert under the sole of the foot, okay, which should give you a clue as to their actions. Another view of those muscles on the lower limb. Let's start with the fibularis longus here. Oh, gastrocnemius, of course, soleus as well. Tibialis anterior. This one's new. This is an ankle flexor. And the opposing extensor digitorum longus right next to it here. That's a extensor of the toes. Oh, and the retinicula here I want to point out as well. Most of these other muscles I've already pointed out to you, but this is a synovial tendon sheath, again, much like what you saw up by your wrists. Alright, and so that brings us to the last checkpoint of this chapter,